Hey friends, thanks for joining us at our E2 podcast on how to help out when someone is about to burn out. Join us today for an encouraging word.
Hey everyone, welcome to the E2 Effective Elders podcast. E2 is devoted to coaching your elder team to win by providing biblical and practical resources in authentic relationships. E2 wants nothing more than to equip you to move God's kingdom forward in the place you're serving Jesus. Visit us at e2elders.org and please share this good word with others.
Hey friends, thanks for joining us again today for the E2 podcast. And as always, our thanks to CDF Capital for investing in elders, in leaders across the country and around the world. They are wonderful partners of E2. You know, in this series of Help Out, we now come to the second episode that I hope will speak into your life as it speaks into mine, and I hope that you will share it with others. It may be that you know someone who is about to burn out. It may be that they are ready to throw in the towel as a pastor, as an elder, as a volunteer in the church. It may be that they're about to burn out on the job wherever they work, maybe at a school, maybe in a hospital. It might be that when it comes to their marriage and family, they are on burnout. Maybe financially, life has become incredibly difficult and painful, and they're on the edge of a burnout. So think, if you would, about somebody with whom you could share this episode or maybe this entire series. Share the link with them. Encourage them to subscribe. Have them follow us on our Facebook page at E2 Elders. All of these podcasts, these encouraging words are there for the benefit of others. Now, today we want to speak about this risk of a burnout and how real it is. As a matter of fact, the Barna Group, they tell us that earlier this year in April, 35% of pastors reported that their mental health was average to poor. This was early on in the midst of the pandemic. April of this year, 35% of the pastors surveyed said their own mental health was poor to average. Now, just some months later, in August, at the end of the summer, 50% of pastors reported that their mental health was poor to average. And this is not limited to pastors. This is true of elders and other leaders in the church. This is true of volunteers in the body of Christ. This is true of people in general. There are individuals who are struggling in a very real way with regard to their emotional mental health, their well-being. Maybe you are struggling. You know, burnout is when we have a physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, difficult time. It's when we're hanging by a thread. As a matter of fact, there are some signs that it may be that we are on the verge of a burnout. There are mood swings. We become exceptionally irritable. We are exhausted, and not only physically, but emotionally. It may be that we have a difficult time sleeping, that we have a recurrence of illness, that our immune system seems to be lacking in some way, shape, or form. We may be given over to panic and anxiety. It may be that we have a sense that we are victims, and we think that way often. It may be that we're looking for a way to escape what's going on in life. It might be that we turn to drinking or to drugs. It may be that some people try to assuage their lowness in life, that valley experience, by spending money they don't have, to buy things they don't need, to impress people they don't know. So there are any number of escape mechanisms that we have in our lives. And what we would do to encourage one another is to look again at the story of the Apostle Paul. In our last episode, we wondered, in a broken season in his life, in ministry, was Paul ready to walk out? It's possible, but God made all the difference so that Paul was able to walk on, not out. Similarly, we come to a place in Paul's life where we could say that Paul was wounded in a number of ways. It might be that Paul was feeling and experiencing some of these signs, that he was hanging by that proverbial thread. And I want to look at Paul in 2 Corinthians. Remember, Paul wrote not one but two letters to the church in Corinth. The second letter he wrote in many ways as a defense of his ministry. After writing the first letter in short order, he wrote the second letter because he was so roundly criticized by people in the church at Corinth. And I wonder if, could it be that their criticism of him ignited a flame of self-defense within Paul? And this passage is very familiar to us. Chapter 11, beginning in verse 23, it's where Paul said, I have worked much harder, been in prison more frequently, been flogged more severely, been exposed to death again and again. 5 times I received from the Jews the 40 lashes minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. I spent a night and a day in the open sea. I have been constantly on the move. I have been in danger from rivers, in danger from bandits, in danger from my own countrymen, in danger from Gentiles, in danger in the city, in danger in the country, in danger at sea, and in danger from false brothers. I've labored and toiled and have often gone without sleep. I have known hunger and thirst and have often gone without food. I have been cold and naked. And besides everything else, I face daily the pressure of my concern for all the churches. Who is weak, and I do not feel weak? Who is led into sin, and I do not inwardly burn? Paul the Apostle may have felt the many wounds of potentially leading him to a place of burnout. Paul was just as human as are you and me. So what you and I want to understand is, we've got to look at ministry. We've got to look at life, marriage, family, jobs, whatever it is, like a marathon. Life is a marathon, not a sprint. I've run a few marathons, and I can remember there were a few things that were very important in finishing a marathon. First of all, there was pace. A person who's going to finish a marathon cannot begin sprinting from the starting line. You got to get a right pace. And not only is pace important, but intake. Even before the race begins, you got to start drinking a lot of water. You've got to do a carb load, got to eat foods that load up carbs for the burning of energy. And even during the marathon, drinking constantly, eating some kind of high carbohydrate caloric intake. And not only intake is important, but training. Training is essential. You just don't go out and start to run a marathon. Training is important before the marathon begins. And we want to remember the importance of a companion while running that marathon, that somebody running alongside can encourage. Sometimes a group of people will run together wanting to finish a marathon. And what we want to remember is the focus. The focus is on the finish, not on the current mile, but on the finish. In the same way, you and I want to understand something about ministry. If you and I are a pastor, if you and I are an elder, if we're a volunteer in the church, and for that matter, when it comes to a job, when it comes to a marriage and family, life is a marathon. And we've got to come up with a pace in life that we can handle. We don't stay up into the wee hours of the morning. We don't get up long before dawn if we're cutting back on our sleep. We've got to work at a pace that we can maintain from day to day to day. And intake is very important. We need the bread of life, this book, this bread of life. We need the living waters. We need intake that is spiritual. And we obviously receive that individually by meeting with the Lord one-on-one, day by day. We receive that intake when we listen to great teaching and preaching of the Word. We read outstanding books that are good for the heart, mind, and soul. So intake is very important if we're going to forestall, hold off burnout. Training is very important. You and I have got to be disciplined. There are spiritual disciplines that are rich and important in you and I finishing well spiritually. So think of training like the spiritual disciplines of corporate worship, of giving, of solitude, of prayer and fasting. There are many disciplines that can absolutely make you and I all the stronger in the Lord. And companionship. There are 53 one another's in the New Testament. Love one another, serve one another, pray for one another, forgive one another, bear with one another, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. 53 of them. And here we know that if something's repeated in the Word, it is important. God expects us to do life with one another. When we read in Genesis chapter 1 that we have been made in the image of God, as a matter of fact, in verse 26, and God said, "Let us make man in our image." So God is in relationship. God the Father, Jesus the Son, the Holy Spirit in relationship. We've been made in their image. We are to do life in relationship. We will not finish well. We will not hold off, forestall a burnout if we're trying to walk alone. No one is an island. And focus. It's very important to focus on the finish. Not just one day at a time, but we want to finish well. Remember the Apostle Paul in 2 Timothy, the last will and testament of Paul, "I have fought the good fight, I have finished the race." And that's what we want to be able to say as well. Much of life consists not of what happens to us, but how we respond to what happens to us. So if we are hanging by that thread and it looks like we're going to burn out, just remember this: time off, just taking some time off, will not in and of itself heal the problem. And the real problem is how we spend our time on. When we're on the clock, when we are on a day doing life. If we're not doing life well, a wrong pace, wrong intake, no companions with whom to run the race of life. If we're not doing life well when we're on, don't even think for a moment that all the time off is going to make the difference. So we live today in a right way so that we can thrive tomorrow. So the tomorrow of life, in many ways, rests in your hands and in mine. It's how we live life today that determines if we're going to thrive tomorrow. We don't have to burn out. So a prayer of blessing for you, for me, for us, maybe for someone with whom you can share this encouraging word in this difficult year, 2020, when so many want to walk out and they're on the verge of burnout. Here's this text. It's from Hebrews chapter 12, beginning in verse 1. "Therefore, since we're surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us." Here it is. Let us fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and the perfecter of our faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, scorning its shame, and he sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Now listen to this. Consider him, Jesus. Consider him. Think about him. Anchor your mind on him. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinful men, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. It's a great text. We're surrounded by people who went on before us, and they were able to hold on to Jesus. And as they did, so also can we. We can help out when it seems that we want to burn out. Encourage one another with these words.